Okay, domain 6, physical security. Physical security objectives. This area, again, this is the first line of defense, because if they get physical access to the box, chances are they're going to own it. That does change, however, whenever you go back to the dumb terms, or if you do full disk encryption. Basically, there are things to do to make it to where it's a lot more difficult for the person to get. But most scenarios, if you get physical access, you own the system. Physical location and construction. We're also going to cover physical security risks, threats, and countermeasures. Electrical issues and countermeasures. Perimeter protection mechanisms, physical intrusion detection, and fire prevention, detection, and suppression. And this is the fun one where we have to memorize a lot of information. And it's one of the things to where a lot of this stuff just doesn't change. So it's going to be, it was the same 20 years ago, it's going to be the same 20 years from now. Like the fire extinguishers and some of the chemicals that are banned now are probably still going to be banned then. One of the things with the electrical, I come across several scenarios. How many people here have heard of dual grounding or multiple grounding? Basically, there's electricity takes the least path of resistance, and there are scenarios to where you'll have a network where some devices are going to be on one ground, other devices are going to be on a separate ground, and depending if the conditions are right, it'll make it to where if this ground has a lot more pull than the other, then the electricity may go over the wire and basically destroy the data. So there's a couple instances. One actually happened, I believe it was in Oregon, at one of the grocery chains, where they went through many different electricians to see what was happening. They also went through several different service companies for computers. And then it ended up a junior electrician figured out that, hey, wait a minute, how would this work, or how would the electricity affect this? And the reason why he figured it out was because, I hate to say it, but he was more open to the possibilities, because in certain fields there's certain things that happen all the time, and there's specific things that theoretically shouldn't happen, that you start to get into a mode that if they theoretically shouldn't happen, those things I shouldn't look for. Electronics are a lot more sensitive to electricity than almost anything else is, especially your basic data cables. But yeah, it went right over the copper. They fixed it to where it was on the same ground and got rid of all their data damage. Okay, physical security threats. Full threat analysis should be conducted. Basically, understanding common threats to any facility. Identifying threats that apply to specifically a certain company. And also, this analysis should help ensure the proper countermeasures are implemented. Like I mentioned before, the organization that was is also in an unsavory neighborhood, but people that basically ran through their fence and then ran through the garage to steal all their server equipment, that's something you definitely need to take into consideration on the placement of the organization if you have to build or if you're trying to move into an area. If you go into a portion of a city that, for example, has spray paint all over all the areas, that the majority of the companies have the big steel bars on the windows, and there's a huge crime rate, there's a good possibility if you go there, you may be broken into a lot more percentage-wise than if you're in the middle of nowhere, where you basically see anybody coming with a car from 5 miles away. Basically, you need to take into consideration not only the local crime, access to the individual area, because a lot of places will have it where if you're in a big city, you may not have parking. So that's a big issue as well, to where if any emergency does happen, it may impede any emergency vehicles getting to the area. Also, vulnerabilities and threats that need to be identified is physical damage, theft of assets, interruption of service, unauthorized disclosure of information, natural disasters, fires, vandalism, terrorism, and of course environmental issues. For example, the good old interruption of services, the good old backhoe is probably the biggest enemy of the internet. I know in the Denver area, it's usually about once or twice a year. Big portions of the internet go down because some contractor either A, has the wrong markups on where the pipes are supposed to be, or they don't actually call before they dig. So they end up digging big fiber lines or big T1, T3 type scenarios. Unauthorized information disclosure is another issue. If you are in a high traffic area, it's going to be harder to basically police all the people that come in and out. There's also been other instances to where people in a skyrise, large cities, they have a wireless access point, and sometimes if they don't do the proper protection on their wireless access point, people may either accidentally or on purpose log onto their system, and then instantly now policy violations are happening because somebody's, for example, at a local coffee shop down at the bottom floor, they connect into the wireless in their conference room, and now are surfing inappropriate images. So instantly that's going to alert on the IDSs or the log files that it's not somebody within the corporation, and it's not malicious, but it is allowing somebody that shouldn't be there into the environment. And if you don't encrypt your data, then it's going to be, since everybody's so close together, lots of people are probably going to be listening in. Maybe not intentionally or on purpose, but it only takes one. Okay, agenda. Going to cover facility construction, device backup, entrance protection, and perimeter security. Okay, location considerations. Of course, you look for natural disasters, especially if you're in Tornado Alley. There's definitely a big possibility that you may have heavy winds. There's local crime, cheaper land prices, but more money will be spent on protecting the company assets. Again, because they're probably going to have bigger fencing, potentially even those cement girders or whatnot. Also, access to highways and airports. I've seen a lot of organizations, international organizations, that would actually be 100 or so miles from the nearest airport. So whenever they fly anybody in, now they have to spend all the money going transportation back and forth from the company to the airport. There's also customer access. If you're a large organization that has a lot of throughput, it's definitely nice and acceptable to have multiple entry points and exit points. But if you do not have a high customer throughput, they want to minimize that as much as possible. There's also joint tenants. Joint tenants are a fun thing because especially if you have a specific building, a joint tenant would not have the same security mindset as you do and won't basically go through the same security policies you would do as well. They'll let people in that they shouldn't let in, and then from that area go into your area. There's quite a few scenarios to where I've seen you'd have a building or an area that has two doors, and basically the doors are set multiple reasons, but one would be, for example, like a man-trap scenario. But because people just don't want to have to deal with opening up one door and opening up another door, they prop one door open completely, and then they'll have like a card swipe on the outside. So you open up the secondary door, and then people hold the door open for everybody else to go through. So one swipe for 10 people. And then especially if you are trying to protect any sort of signal from coming out of that specific area, that's why you had two doors there, then that basically defeats the purpose of the security. But there's also proximity to emergency services as well. You'll have, with emergency services, if your building catches fire, if fire department's going to be half an hour away, it's going to cause a lot more damage than if it's right next door. Same thing with police stations. If there's a police station right next door, chances are people are probably not going to be breaking into your organization, or it's going to minimize the level. So basically, again, the 80-20 rule, you're going to get a lot more sophisticated attackers trying to attack you because all the planning that goes into it, or you're going to get the people that should have been culled out of the herd at birth, go directly up to your organization and try to break in broad daylight. I've also seen with joint tenants, organizations that don't want to tout where they're at. So they'll have 80-90% of the actual physical building, and then they'll co-locate with another smaller entity, and then they'll actually either pay or let the smaller entity put advertising up on the building. So when everybody drives by, it looks like that entire building is for that smaller entity, not the larger organization that they're trying to hide the fact that they're actually there. That's definitely a thing for like financial institutions, things like that. If you have a data center somewhere, that's going to be a high target as opposed to maybe a tech support center. Even though tech support centers would have higher targetability with social engineering. Okay, visibility. Should the facility stand out and attract attention? And what types of signs and markings should be on the building? If it is your data center, you do not want to say data center, third floor, second door on your left. Construction issues. What's the facility to be used for? If it's going to be storage, office space, or industrial plant, basically it's going to determine the materials that are going to be in the area and then how the floors are going to be designed. Are there emanation security threats? Basically, may require walls and ceilings to be reinforced with material that controls electrical radiation. This basically comes down to Tempest. You need to memorize Tempest for the test. And there's a, going back to that secondary folder, there is a nice document that's running out on the internet called Tempest, a Security Problem. This was released out on the internet. It was declassified earlier this year. It was back from the 70s, and it's basically just given a nice definition or a nice example of Tempest. Tempest. Tempest is relating to electromagnetic radiation. So you basically tune into the frequency of an electronic device and then see exactly what it's supposed to be doing.
Also to prevent crossover too.
Yep, prevent crossovers.
Wireless keyboards, are they an issue?
A very big issue for multiple reasons. Same thing like this, if you have a strong enough antenna, or either A, you can see what they're typing, or B, you can either disrupt their typing or force the system to do what you're telling it to do as opposed to what the system is doing. But like with Tempest, when I mentioned Faraday cages with like passports and things like that, or cell phone security, a lot of people doing forensics will actually have a Faraday cage to make sure the signal doesn't come in or out, because a lot of the BlackBerries have the kill all signal, so where as soon as they get the signal, it tries to wipe the drive or wipe the content. It's a good security feature, but forensics it kind of sucks. But same type of scenario with here. A Tempest secured building would be an entire environment that is a big Faraday cage. Signal's not supposed to come in, signal's not supposed to come out. A lot of these type of scenarios would have a building or a physical area, geographic area, where they may have multiple walls. And basically it's trying to protect, if it is able to get through one wall, then it's not able to get through the second, so you'd have the control doors. Basically big storm door looking things as well. But with this scenario, what ended up happening was they're making a cryptographically strong, basically a crypto machine. And it was a really good crypto machine. Signal really couldn't be cracked, but if you're sniffing that type of area. But somebody was able to tune into the keystrokes. So before the machine encrypted the data, it was in clear text until it got to the crypto portion, they were able to recreate everything that was typed on a device in another room. And what was funny was basically since the 50s, we've known about it and have protected against it. And what was even more interesting is since the late 40s, the old USSR was doing the same thing. They didn't have any white papers that were found or whatnot, but they were protecting a lot of their electronics in the same ways that we started protecting them. So it's been around for a long time. And back to the wireless, it's even worse because it's actually broadcasting a lot further. Like a CRT monitor, you might be able to be on the other side of the hotel, and if you just happen to get in the same frequency, you can tune in to see what's on somebody else's computer screen or TV, or what's going on their radio dial or whatnot. But with a wireless, because it's being broadcast, basically your antenna needs to be less sensitive than just a device that's broadcasting. The LCDs are a lot less sensitive than CRTs, but still to an extent they are sensitive. I know that there are scenarios to where they say that your keyboard should not be close to your specific monitors depending on the different networks that you're going to be on. Same thing with phones, should not be specific length or distance between different monitors as well. And then monitors shouldn't be close to other monitors.
KVMs also.
Yeah, KVMs. And then network cables are not supposed to be touching. They should be a certain distance as well. There have been scenarios to where, again, these regulations do change because technology changes. But again, almost every piece of electronics, has some sort of frequency that it emanates from it. But that goes back to the good old the Tempest, which would be the signal emanations. With that being said, also with cell phones, a lot of people try to secure their organization from people being in cell phones and then shipping information out. That's one of the big problems in a lot of areas, to where that's an easy way to exfiltrate information. Either A, you take pictures with your cell phone, then text it to somebody through a graphic text or through an email. And as long as you can get signal, that's relatively easy to do. I know a lot of people would have those cell phone cards or an actual cell phone and hook it up to their laptop. And even though there's a no wireless policy, they don't see that as being a wireless device because that's not 802.11. And they'll still be able to connect to the outside world. For example, like a cell phone provider, connect to the internet, and now there's a portal from their system into the rest of the network, or from the rest of the network out to the real world without going through the primary gateway. So that's a huge violation, and actually happens more common than not. And then again with your good old laptops. If you have a no wireless policy for laptops in a specific area, a lot of people will forget to turn their laptops off, or will forget to turn the wireless on their laptops off. I've seen many situations where VIPs, or very important people within an organization, will all be coming together and to do some sort of event within a corporation or company. And a lot of times they all stay at the same hotel because the company's paying for it. What ends up happening, eventually, let's say you have 50 people, at least one of these people, probably 3 to 5 of these people, will go through the network wizard trying to connect to the new network that's going to be at the hotel. And through this process, turn on their Wi-Fi to be a peer-to-peer access point with the hotel name on it. And the funny part about it is nothing happens. They say, what's going on? They see this button that says view wireless networks. They click on it. They see the hotel network that they want to connect to. They then connect to it. Everybody else connects to the same wireless network. And the funny part is, the next day they come on site on your no wireless policy area. These 1, 2, or 3 people, 5 people are now broadcasting the hotel name's access point in peer-to-peer mode, and the other 45 people that have connected to that access point in the past, because they didn't turn off their wireless card on their laptop, probably instantly going to connect to the access point that's connected to the other person's system. So that's a violation where most people do it on accident, and it is a violation and a security issue, but usually things don't go nefariously wrong with it. But if an attacker were to do the same thing, know that the hotel that the people are staying at put up an access point with a strong antenna or whatnot, they can easily have the person connect directly to them and do the, again, password sniffing, basically anything and everything, trying to exfiltrate data out. But that's another reason why people will try to prevent some of the wireless emanations from exiting a building or getting into a building, is just to prevent wireless networks, cell phones, and other type of wavelengths. It's also level of fire resistance. Light frame will be destroyed in fire in approximately 30 minutes. Use of heavy timber requires a minimum thickness for structure to be 4 inches. Basically, fire-resistant material is a type of insulation that it provides some sort of protection against the fire. Basically, steel or mineral wool is sprayed on the structure elements. It's basically meaning that it's going to take longer for the building to become 100% destroyed. Okay, data center locations and NOCs, or network operation centers. Quite a few other names for them, but NOCs are relatively common. A data center location, basically located in the core facility for protection from exterior threats. You do not want it on the basement, because if the building floods, the data center is going to flood. You do not want it on the top floor because, again, if there's a fire, that's going to be the most likely to be damaged because of either smoke or flames or whatnot. You usually want it to be in the center of the building. So, for example, if you have a 6-story building, it's going to be on floor, let's say 3 or 4 or whatnot. It's going to be in the center, not only of the height, but in the actual center of the building. So people can't basically break through a window and then be right into the server room. You should not have the server room with open windows if you absolutely can get away with it. That's another thing. For example, let's say gas line blows up right outside, tears apart the outside of the building. If your server room is on the exterior portion of the building, then there have been cases where companies would lose large portions of equipment and data, of course, when people would just come in, steal things or loot things, and then leave. Okay, important item to evaluate, of course, location of windows, doors, security of loading docks, backup power plans, and then fire suppression. How many people here have to deal with like rolling brownouts or blackouts at all? Yeah, some places actually have it where there are a lot of people in a geographic area, or the infrastructure is old or whatnot, or basically it's just overloaded. So a lot of places will have either scheduled rolling blackouts or brownouts, or just random brownouts, which basically the difference between a blackout and a blackout means you have no power. All the power is cut and you can't do anything about it. With a brownout is usually you have power, but it's not at 100%. And a lot of times you'll see the lights start to flicker. A lot of times servers will start to crash because they're doing a lot of drain on the electricity as well. And the brownouts are very dangerous for systems. That's why a lot of people really push the UPSs, because even though they may be 15 minutes of lifetime, that at least gives you enough time to properly shut down your server, so you minimize the risk of data loss. Then of course your fire suppression. You will need to know your different fire extinguishers. The issue is you need to basically memorize A through C. D is definitely important to know as well, because that's basically anything that's metal that catches fire. But in real life, you'll probably never have to deal with a D fire extinguisher unless you're in a special circumstance, because if metal's on fire, you probably have other portions of your problems that you need to deal with first. So that's basically going to be like phosphorus or other types of items that burn at like 3,000 degrees. Okay, controlling access. Restricting access to sensitive areas. Basically, security professionals must first access the company's workflow process. Basically, you need to know who needs to have access to the area. And again, mentioned before with the janitorial staff, that's one of the items to where a lot of times they need full access to everything, but a lot of times you may have to put other security controls in place to make sure that they truly don't have access to everything, such as in a server room. They may be able to go in there, make sure that's cleaned out, but the server rack should have some sort of lock on them or some sort of protection so people can't insert CDs, copy things, USB as well. Also, how often do they need access? What level of protection do sensitive assets require? If you have an item that basically you just need the swipe card through, which is a basic level, that should be fine as well. But if you have a specific content which could be business destroying data or entity destroying data, what can end up happening is the swipe card may no longer be valid. You may have to have a swipe card and possibly biometrics as well. Okay, necessary alerts and logging of activity. Again, the alerts and logging activity goes back to the auditing process. So again, you can validate if anything bad happens, and then it, of course, is going to alert. Then the logging is going to tie back the sensitive information into a entity or asset that is not going to be accessible by the person that's actually tripping the alert or the alarm. Okay, fire codes. These require what type of design fire route. And also, access also needs to be restricted for Havoc, which is electrical power services in Havoc, telephone and data lines, and surveillance and monitoring devices. So why would you want your telephone lines and data lines potentially to be separated? For example, let's say if you're running VoIP on a network, why would you want your VoIP separated from your data lines? Crossover. Especially if somebody's doing a denial service on your network, then it could take down your voice lines as well. The potential for sniffing, especially if you're just doing it over VLAN. If they know how to basically hop from VLAN to VLAN, they can possibly do an ARP poison or whatnot and try to get information off of the VoIP system. There's also, of course, the surveillance and monitoring. Those, even though they may be IP-based as well, should also probably be on a separate network. For multiple reasons, as far as the same as the VoIP, you give people the capability of potentially getting information when they shouldn't, and then it also makes it a third line or potentially a secondary line to when if the first two go out, you can still see what's going on. Then Havoc. Why is Havoc important? Or what is Havoc? HVAC. Yep. Heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. Basically, these are important for a couple reasons. It could even be used as a fire suppression. Basically, you're drowning out the fire, no longer giving oxygen to the fire, so it quelches it down. The only challenge is you need to make sure there's no human life in there, because if you, yeah. Okay, possible threats. As I mentioned the first day, the good old partitions. This is a fun one, especially if you're co-locating. Because a lot of people, when they co-locate, either A, they won't have full walls going all the way through, so you can easily cut through them, or you can just go over the ceiling or under the floor. Basically, room separators, they do not extend to the true floor and the true ceiling, and they should not be used to protect secure areas. Okay, external boundary protection. Of course, you have your locks, your fencing and physical barriers, your security force. Somebody understand what security force is? Basically, they're like security guards or police officers, MPs. It's a scenario to where, of course, they're probably going to be carrying weapons or dogs or whatnot, and they're going to be guards. You have your outside lighting, your intrusion detection, and your monitoring devices. Your intrusion detection, definitely things to know for example, like the CISSP, as you're looking at probably the more expensive ones, the PIDUS. Anybody know what that is? PIDUS fencing? It's basically like a big fence with razor wire on top. It has, basically it's an intrusion prevention system. So again, people see it, they hopefully won't go through, but if they do try to cut through it, it has vibration sensors, it has other sorts of sensors to where if people try to go past that device, it's supposed to alarm and alert people. So we're at least they're going to be looking at the area that's setting off the alarm. So, and also monitoring devices such as CCTVs. Goals is basically to provide a first line of defense, because if you can prevent the attacker from getting in, chances are they're probably not going to get or be as successful at getting the data as normally they would. One thing that you want to make sure as far as if you have a fence up there, there's no way to completely prevent an attacker from getting into your organization if they're determined. Because if they're determined, if they can't get in one way, they're going to get in some other way. Or at least they're going to keep trying until they finally are successful. But you can deter a lot of people. For example, if you have deterring trespassing and vandalism, you could have an 8-foot fence with a strand of barbed wire on top. That's going to prevent the majority of people of breaking in or getting through that area. But if you have it to where it's only a 4-foot fence, that's not going to deter a lot of the people that are not really just determined, but they think something's interesting on that side. It will deter people that are just your basic bystanders. So again, the fencing a lot of times is to keep the honest people honest. It protects guests and employers from danger, and also funnels employees and visitors through collected access points. So again, why is it important to have basically centralized access points for in and out of the organization? Yep, you can see everybody that comes in, so you know if there's a danger coming in, you can prevent them from entering the area. And then the secondary issue is if they did come in, you have to have some way of slowing them down to where either security forces or police or some way of stopping them to prevent them from leaving the area. It's also lock types. These are always fun. There's the conventional locks. The majority of the old locks, the good old cylinder and pin design, hasn't really changed in a few hundred years. So they're just as easy to pick now as they used to be, unless they're more advanced. Like I mentioned before, the mushroom heads basically make it to where there's indents within the pin itself, which makes them pick resistant. They're not going to be pick proof, but they are going to be pick resistant. They're easily picked, keys easily duplicated. There's pick resistant locks. They're higher cost, harder to pick, and the keys are not as easily duplicated. A lot of times you also have the electronic keys. You'll see those in cars and some other devices as well. Those are going to be a lot more expensive. The electronic key systems, cards encoded with access code. High-end systems controlled when people are authorized to enter, logs entrances and exits, and controls a group of doors. Then also have your electronic combination lock. Keypad for combination, also called a cipher lock. Sometimes it's not just a keypad, sometimes it's a rotation device as well, but still it's going to be at the electronic aspect. And I hate the ones that rotate, because once you overshoot the number, then you have to flip it more. Okay, identification mechanisms. Of course, you have your good old photo ID viewed by a security guard. And photo IDs, these are basically considered public information, because these are things that the person's going to carry on them but are easily reproduced. It's relatively easy to reproduce a regular ID, especially with a photo. Put whatever name you want on it, your picture, because it has to be associated with your identification. The issue comes into it if it's biometric, then it has to have some specific content which is going to be pushed into their database. So with a lot of the photo IDs, if you fake those, it's going to come down to kind of like a social engineering attack for the people that are actually looking at the content. The biometric devices, again, your fingerprint scanners, your iris, your retina scanners, your hand geometry. There's card badge readers, your magnetic swipe, embedded wire, and then magnetic dots. Again, with the badge readers, especially if they're magnetic strips, a lot of times, again, those are going to be easy to fake because if you have a reader and then a writer, you can get some of the basic cards as well. Can sometimes make it to where your regular ID badge, like driver's license, can easily be duplicated, at least from the mechanical standpoint. Okay, types of proximity devices. You have your user-activated, basically puts in a key code or acts as a swipe card or proximity device. A lot of times you'll have those cards with RFID on it as well, so you put it right next to the reader, and then it unlocks the device for you. And also system sensing. Reader transmits interrogating signal, and the user device sends an access code. Okay, piggybacking. How many people here have dealt with that before? How many people have done that before? It comes down to it, especially in a pen test, that's one of the best things to do, just to see if you can, if the guards are paying attention. Best way of doing it is holding a bunch of books or holding something heavy, computer or whatnot, and then start walking towards the door while other people are walking as well. And sometimes you can either A, piggyback along other people that are piggybacking, or you can have it to where you're bouncing off of their friendliness. Another thing that done is basically have crutches, wrap your leg up, and then try to walk through and then fumble with your crutches. So again, people are going to feel sorry for you, try to open the door for you. With the guard perspective, it shouldn't matter if you have a broken leg or if you're about to drop a $100,000 piece of equipment, you should be identified of who you are and then authorized into the area. Okay, usually an individual just follows another person in, person closely through a door without providing any credentials. Best preventative measure, this type of a problem, is a security guard and employee education. Because a lot of times you'll go through the process. If you don't tell the employees to basically interrogate anybody that comes through that you don't recognize, ask who they are, and if they don't give you the proper information, then call security immediately. Then a lot of times they don't know, they'll just let you right on through. Unfortunately, this wasn't a pen test, it was just out of bad habit. Went to this one organization I was having a contract with, and I didn't have a temporary badge. It's the first day I was there. I walked in through one of the doors, and I didn't see the sign that said, if you don't have authorization, you need to go around the other door. So I walked in with a group of individuals. I sat next to this chair waiting for my contact to come up. They didn't come up for about 15 minutes, so then I went to ask where this training room was. So they allowed me, I walked in basically through the first set of doors, and then I was actually piggybacked through a second and then a third set of doors into the training area, and then basically started the setup. And then after I set up everything, found out that there was a strict policy that people are supposed to question people they don't recognize, and you're not supposed to be able to get into the organization without any sort of temporary badge. So yeah, I was able to get the temporary badge right away, and that was a finding, an unintentional finding. But, and in one of the areas, it was actually set up kind of like a man trap, except you didn't have to offer any sort of identification. But it did have a phone, because if you didn't have the badge access to get in, you're supposed to call the people to say, would you please let me in, I'm so-and-so. So it wasn't a real man trap, but it was still the man trap methodology.
What is a man trap?
Man trap is basically where you have a specific room, you have two doors, and one door opens, you go in, and then it basically locks you in this environment. And then you have to authenticate who you are. Once you're authenticated, the other door opens, and then you're able to get through. So if you lie about it, they basically have you there for law enforcement to come pick you up, or security forces. Or if you can't authenticate, they open up the back and then back you out, and then you have to go to, let's say, pass an ID or to an administration office to get a new identity tag or whatnot. So that's what they call about man traps. Okay, turnstiles, again, revolving doors. These can be activated to lock. Same type of scenario as a man trap, but it's going to be one of the scenarios to where there's no authentication phase. Then man traps. Individual must be authenticated to enter the man trap. Then they must be authenticated again to exit the man trap and gain access to the internal work area. And so with that being said, I've seen a lot of areas to where you have to go through a specific authentication phase to get into the area to where there's the portal. And then within that area, there's a low-level trust, is that yes, you belong in this area, but you don't really get access to anything. And then when you go through the portal or through the secondary man traps, they validate that you have the special access to get into this area. And then within each individual access area, they do the same thing. So basically it's a layered defense, or kind of like your protection rings in software. Okay, fencing. Okay, heights provide degrees of protection. This is something that is going to basically just be memorized. You have your 3 to 4 foot. This deters the casual trespasser. The 6 to 7 foot is too too high to climb easily. So it again is going to deter a lot more people. So again, each step is going to be your 80-20 rule. So only 20% of the people are probably going to get past the 3 to 4 foot. Out of those, again, the 80-20. And then the 8 foot with 3-strand barbed wire deters most determined intruders. However, with that being said, if it is a determined intruder, you cannot stop a determined intruder. So what they'll do is they'll look at that. They'll say, that's going to be a lot of work. Let's look for a low-hanging fruit item. So that could be they crawl underneath the truck or whatnot and then try to basically piggyback in on a vehicle. So when it comes down to it, if they're a determined intruder, they can still get into the area. Okay, critical areas should have at least an 8-foot fence. And with the 3 strands of barbed wire, there's another issue to where there should probably be multiple wires as well inside the strands to make sure that the strands of barbed wire aren't pushed down. Because a common thing to do, especially if you're doing a pen test or whatnot, is get like a thick material, basically those thick blankets like horse blankets or whatnot, throw it over the fence and then try to flatten it out so you can climb over it. But if you have those thin, basically wires in between to keep the barbed wire in circles or the spirals, then it's going to make that a lot more difficult as well. Okay, powered fences basically sounds an alarm when touched and sends out an electrical shock to the trespasser. Then you have your PIDAS, which is Perimeter Intrusion Detection and Assessment System. This detects if somebody tries to climb a fence or cut the fence. It's a mesh wire fence with a passive cable vibration sensor and sets off an alarm if detected. When would be a scenario when you would not want to use a PIDAS fence? Or a couple scenarios.
A lot of birds.
Yep. Birds, wind. Yeah, basically if you're in an area with a lot of movement, animals, wind, whatnot, that's going to be set off all the time. And then, of course, it's the most expensive. Which one?
Near school.
Yeah, near school. Near any sort of kids, because they're attracted to stuff like that. Yeah, a lot of false positives going to happen if you have any movement. So it'd be better if it was in, for example, a protected area where you're minimizing the amount of people that go into there, and then you're in a geographic location that doesn't have a lot of earthquakes, a lot of high winds, which basically makes it to where there's like 4 places on Earth that you can be able to use this safely. And then it's very expensive. It's another deterrent. Okay, lighting. Lighting deters trespassers because if you can see them coming from a mile away, of course, they may not want to come into your area. How many people here have heard of urban exploration? If you do some internet searches on urban exploration, there's a lot of videos out for that as well. So basically, these individuals will find a place that looks like it could potentially be abandoned or that people left for the night. And then they look for doors that are open. And if they do find one, they just walk in. And they see how far they can get, see what they can find. Urban exploration is basically trespassing. But it's becoming more and more popular where people just see how far they can get into an area. Because there's a lot of interesting things you can sometimes find in a lot of the like tech centers and industrial areas and things like that. So that whole thing with the lighting, if you don't have lighting, you're a higher target for urban exploration. Okay, also required in critical areas, entrances and parking lots. Basically where employees walk or gather for a couple reasons. is it's going to deter crime, and it's going to increase the safety of the employees. Ensure that there are no dead zones, just like on those cell phone commercials. And then within that, there's dark areas between lighting areas. Illumination of the lights should slightly overlap to ensure full coverage, because then if one goes out, then it's going to minimize the dead area. And should be properly combined with surveillance tools. Okay, perimeter security guards. Basically, functions and training. They're the best deterrent, but most expensive because, of course, you have to pay them a salary. Fences you usually don't have to pay. Most automated and technology-based tools require human interaction, and necessary when human interaction or interpretation of a situation and a discriminating judgment is needed. So when it comes down to it, if you have, for example, technology in the mix that you're looking for the 25-pound weight barrier, but the person is able to get into a specific area and they're only at 19 pounds overweight because they're carrying a bag with potential explosives or something like that in it. They can get into an area to where the technology side is going to completely miss it. It's going to bypass it because nothing's out of the norm. But you may have it to where a security guy or guard sees the bag and says that people really shouldn't have bags in this area, or if the person sets it down and then leaves, like a good old gym bag. I've actually seen that happen on accident several times, to where somebody would be talking with some other people, put their gym bag down in a secured area, and then just walk away, basically home for the day, leave the area, the geographic area, and then unfortunately you hear over the intercom that everybody needs to exit the building because now they found this gym bag with potential bad things in it. So everybody's then escorted out, security forces come, or bomb squad comes, hazmat or whatnot comes, check out the gym bag, and sometimes hazmat's required for some of these gym bags. But when it comes down to it, then you realize that it's a false positive. And then, of course, the guy probably lost all of his stuff because they'd probably destroyed it, making sure that it was not dangerous, yeah. So you always want to make sure that you bring your bags with you and don't leave them in secured areas. Okay, possible tasks. Ensure that company's property does not leave the facility, because if company property does leave, then that's a big issue as well. Because I've seen several scenarios that I've even been a part of it, where just transporting data from one area to the other. For example, giving information to law enforcement, to where the law enforcement was outside the protected area that we're in, so we're bringing servers or bringing workstations out, or hard drives or whatnot, and basically handfuls of computer equipment. That's one of the scenarios to where the security guard should say, hey, what are you doing? Why do you have all that computer equipment? Why are you leaving the facility with it? There are many cases to where they don't, because they, I guess, do not see that as being out of the ordinary, which is a bad thing. There has been a case to where one of my previous clients, it was really interesting because this was a large manufacturing company. What ended up happening was that somebody walked in, pretended, I guess, like they worked there, didn't say anything, just walked into the organization, and then started going from room to room, and then found one of the IT rooms they were setting up several hundred laptops in. What they ended up doing was closing some of the laptops, putting up the power supplies, and then started transporting laptop after laptop. They got out with over 25 laptops, and each laptop had some sensitive information in it, not too much because they're all being set up from scratch, but still they had a little bit. And the person wasn't asked who they were once, why they were taking equipment out of the office or off-site one time. And it comes down to, if anybody in that chain that passed him, which was probably over 100 people, not only the security guards, but the people coming into the organization, people leaving, passing him in the hallways, didn't recognize him, of course, because the person didn't work there, they would have been able to stop the theft right then and there. Okay, enforce regulations. Again, if certain regs are, I guess, no running in the hallways. There's also monitor intrusion detection and fire alarm systems. One thing that, unfortunately, with personal experience, I have to share with the class is that there's only so long you can microwave popcorn before it starts to smolder. I had this bag of popcorn, and again, this was in a server room, and luckily the fire alarms didn't go off. And and I'm so lucky that didn't go off. But the back of the popcorn, it was in like 3.5 minutes. And I didn't realize the microwave was a very high-powered microwave because it was a smaller one. So I put it in 3.5 minutes. I hear the phone go off, so I leave the area, which you should never do with popcorn. So that was a bonehead move on my end. So I end up coming back, and the entire server room, when I open the door, just full of smoke. You can't even see the microwave. Yeah.
That's not good.
It's not good at all. It's not good at all. So the first thing I'm thinking of is, wow, the server room's on fire. And then I realized that it's coming out of the microwave when I get close enough, because the smoke is really heavy. And the ceiling's probably twice as high as this, so probably about 20, 30 feet tall, really high up there. And not a single thing. The smoke's getting up to the ceiling, so I'm assuming they were heat-based sensors as opposed to smoke-based sensors, or they were just broken. So it's one of the scenarios to where I open the door because there's still like 5-10 seconds left, and smoke is just billowing out of this microwave. And the microwave was a white one. Now it's still a brownish one to this day. And all the popcorn basically liquefied and had this black sludge at the bottom. And then, of course, take it out of the microwave. I made the call to the physical security. And the sad part was I call and say, I'm up in this area. I was in the server room, microwave popcorn, and there's a lot of smoke in here because I burnt the popcorn. And unfortunately, no alarms went off down there, but they did say, hey, hold on just a minute. I heard myself get put on speakerphone. They said, could you please repeat that? So, and then after I did, I heard a bunch of laughing, and they say, yeah, if we hear anything, we'll just mark it off as a false alarm. But yeah, it's one of those very lucky situations to where the water systems or the fire suppression systems didn't go off because there were a lot of servers in that room. Okay, intrusion detection technologies. We're looking at the electromagnetic, which is mostly widened. There's the magnetic switches, magnetic foils and windows, and pressure mats. A lot of times you'll see this in your basic home security systems. And then also volumetric, which is going to be vibrations, microwaves, ultrasonic passive infrared, or photoelectric. How many people here have seen It Takes a Thief? Or not It Takes, yeah, It Takes a Thief. It's
The two former burglars.
yeah, basically, yeah, they're two former crooks. One guy goes in and tries to social engineer a homeowner to say, can we break into your house? We just want to show you that vulnerabilities are there. You have a security system. I bet we can get past it. And somehow they talk these people into doing this on national TV. So then they go into this van. And you could definitely tell the other guy's been doing this for a long time, because he breaks into the house usually within a minute or so. Even if there's dogs or whatnot, he'll scope that there's dogs and then have some sort of treats, put them down there. And of course the dogs instantly, you think that's just a old wives' tale or on TV, but most dogs, as long as you're feeding them, they're happy. And then he breaks into the place, and then he completely trashes it. He'll go into the kitchen, he'll break all kinds of things. But what's amazing is almost every time he'll find the hidden money, which somebody may be putting in a flower pot or putting in an actual kitchen flower. They'll be hiding it in specific places. He'll get keys, the hidden money, passports, IDs, things like that in almost every case. And then this one instance I saw, he goes into the basement, and they're all timing this. And it would take most people, you would think, maybe an hour or so to go through all this scenario. He gets the guy's passport, money, some keys, goes into the basement, and this is all within 30 seconds or so. And then he sees this room full of art. And he goes, no, pulls this one out, and then keeps going through, and then pulls a few more out, and then basically takes it out of the house, puts it in a van, and then steals a bunch more valuables such as jewelry and other items. Well, the owner's watching this and going, wow, he just picked out all the expensive artwork. The other stuff was the low-end stuff. So the guy actually knew what he was looking for, because I guess he's been doing this quite a long time. But another scenario, instead of just breaking in the house, this was a separate finding to where all the windows had these magnetic strips and stuff, the lights were on, and instead of breaking the window, because that would have called the cops, trying to open the windows, he looks around, sees a neighbor has a ladder in their yard. He basically steals the neighbor's ladder, brings it over into the other person's yard, goes to the second story building, gets on this little roof area, and then looks for windows without the lights on it. And then he found one.